Hello, everyone. It's great having you again with us in our podcast, Růžička Kweenolog on X. I'm for the first time in many weeks, I'm saying hi from Prague, not on the road. So hello, everyone.
Okay, hello everyone. Hello from the South Bohemia. Today is Friday, but you are watching us on Wednesday, so that's magic. Honza, could you introduce our dear guest for today's interview?
So today we will talk about ASEAN, Southeast Asia, and Philippines and Vietnam specifically, and the best guy, or in this context, girl that knows everything about those two countries is in Sweden. So hello, Anika. Where you are in Sweden? In Stockholm?
In Stockholm, in a very, very cold Stockholm, very far from Southeast Asia, actually.
So it's great having you. For our audience, Anika is a very, very seasoned CEO and leader. She worked, if I quickly introduce her, she was CEO in GE Money Bank in her own country and then whole Scandinavia. Then she moved to Philippines. She was a CEO of Home Credit Philippines, then in Vietnam. And now she's back in Sweden, and she is board member of Sampo, which is leading insurance company again in whole Scandinavia. So great having you, Anika.
Thank you, Honza, and Happy New Year. Happy New Year of the Dragon. And let's hope that this dragon puts some fire into the economy this year. I think we need it worldwide.
You are in freezing Stockholm, but it's not many months since you are back from Southeast Asia, where there is a New Year, Year of Dragon, and there is hot weather. Even now, I'm looking now for Ho Chi Minh City and Manila, almost 30 degrees. So after being back from Asia after almost a decade, doing business there, running business, what you miss the most? The weather?
Okay, so I'm actually just 6 weeks back. So obviously, yes, I miss the weather. I miss the heat, both from a business perspective and from a climate perspective. I think on a personal level, of course, I miss the people the most. That would be the number one thing I think about, and I keep on connecting with them. Obviously, now wishing everyone Happy New Year of the Dragon, especially in Vietnam, which is celebrating Tet at the moment. I think from a professional point of view, though, I think you guys know Asia well, you know Southeast Asia well, and it's very simple to get addicted, I would say, to the change, the development, the fast movement, the young people, everything is happening. Of course, it's quite challenging as well, but it's frustrating from time to time. But that constant movement, I don't think I've seen anywhere else than in Southeast Asia. And I must say I miss that, as frustrating as it can be. But that constant buzz, it's addictive.
So when you like the people in this region, how was it to run a business? Was it good as well?
I mean, I don't think I really knew what to expect when I landed 8 years ago. I think I had very limited view of Asia and Southeast Asia. And I think slightly, I don't know, Asia was one for me. And obviously Asia is very different depending on if you talk, Japan, China, India, Thailand, Vietnam, or Philippines. It's very, very different. So I didn't really know what to expect. So I had a very, very steep, I think, learning curve for the first couple of months. And I think you still learn. It's because if you're not born in a culture, you still learn as you go, obviously. I think me being Nordic and with quite a long business background in the Nordics is known for being very consensus-driven, very team-building, very inclusive, very transparent in terms of leadership style. And then coming to Philippines, where it's much more authority, much more hierarchy, was obviously quite a big difference. Also, in general, people are younger, a lot younger. So they're less experienced, but also more open to change. So I think that was a big change in terms of leadership. If you look at Asia in general, compared to making business, if you look more business overall, Asia, and I would say all countries, are much more relationship-based. Making business in the Nordics, you make a deal, you look at the numbers, if the cost and benefit is right, you write the contract and everything is in the contract. In Asia, the process is normally quite different. You build a relationship, even with your suppliers, with your partners, even with government. They want to see you. They want to know who you are. They might, from a supplier point of view, actually want to invite you home a few times before they actually get to discussing that contract. And I think that was quite new for me. I mean, in Sweden, we're much more from an engineering kind of background. What's on the paper, that's how it works. It's more logical. Asia is much more emotional, even in terms of business.
You now describe the difference, Europe, specifically Nordics, and Asia at large. But we also know that there are huge differences among Asian countries, even Southeast Asian countries. So it would be generalization to have them in one bucket. So you spent few years in Philippines, Manila, and then few years in Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City. So what are the differences in the business culture and culture in general?
I think there are many similarities for me. In terms of me coming from the outside looking in, there are many similarities. But obviously, a business culture is very much based on the culture and the government of that country. And obviously, the background and the history of Philippines and Vietnam is very, very different. So Vietnam being a communist country, even if it's quite a pragmatic communist country, it's much more stable, might be slightly slower in terms of culture, but it's much more stable moving forward. It's a lot about what we would call social harmony, and everyone needs to come along. So that's the whole stability. It's more opaque. It's not as clear. Again, you want to feel the ground a little bit before you make a decision. And it's very indirect, I would say, in terms of you need to read between the lines. Again, in all situation in Vietnam. And I think if there's one thing to say about Vietnam is that everyone is an entrepreneur, an opportunist. Everyone is running their own little business. I think that's very Vietnamese. So that would be Vietnam. Many similarities, I would say, in Philippines, but there things moves a little bit quicker. They move forward and then maybe they back home again. But both, I think, from a business point of view and from a regulatory point of view, you can perceive sometimes that development is quicker in the Philippines. People are easier to get close to. They're much more smiley in that sense. It's a language thing as well, of course. But I would say they're more open in that sense. It takes a little bit longer to get into Vietnam. So I think business, but again, me being more, I think, Western oriented in that sense, it's a little bit easier to understand Filipino culture, business culture, I would say.
When we come back to the general point of view and look at the region as a whole, now it's the fastest growing region in the world, and it will be in the near future, very probably. So what are you, in your opinion, what are the driving forces behind this very fast development?
I mean, it's not my opinion, but just pure demographics of the region. It's going to drive this region forward. I would say the growing middle class and the consumption where everyone wants to have a better day tomorrow than what they have today. I think that's, especially if you look at Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia, which I would probably know the most, everyone is looking for a better tomorrow. And I mean, clearly, if you look even at macroeconomic numbers and predictions, the pure growth of the population, the very young population, I think median age is 30 to 34, depending on what country, it's going to drive that development. It's digital native. Also, the digital side is what's going to grow this region. But remember that even modern trades, the old traditional offline trade is also developing. Yeah, going from small mom and pop stores into much more established and, malls and things like this. It's really driving the region. I think, and of course, everyone is moving into the cities. So urbanization in general is driving. So young, growing middle class, many opportunities with all of these people going into consumption over time. I think the prediction is that, I don't know, I think Vietnam is going to probably be the 10th largest consumer market in 2030, and that's not so far from now. Indonesia, obviously, I think probably 6 or 7. So, yes, very dynamic, very fast growing, and might be some hiccups, but I'm quite convinced that they're going to succeed with this.
You mentioned now also Indonesia. There are, let's say, new tigers in Southeast Asia, like the old tigers were Taiwan and Japan and Korea now, and Hong Kong, of course. Now we see the big dynamics also in Malaya, where the Singapore is now trying to steal the show from Hong Kong. Also, Thailand is moving up. There is also the question of India as a sort of new China. And when we see GDP growth of India, it's really skyrocketing. So if you now from the helicopter, if you can say a few words about the other economies of ASEAN, Southeast Asia, if you see some advantages that we didn't say till now, and if there is some, let's say, leadership in other countries, not only in Philippines and Vietnam.
So India, I know very little about, to be honest. And if you look at both Thailand and Malaysia, they're relatively small in comparison to the 3 countries we already discussed. And of course, you have Laos and Cambodia as well, very small. Both Thailand and Malaysia, are ahead, I would say, in terms of development. Also, of the 3 countries we were previously discussing. Singapore, obviously, it's an outlier in general. They've extremely well succeeded with the government to build a nice infrastructure in Singapore, and they clearly have quite a bright future. And also being kind of that center of I would say business for the region, I think they will clearly take that role. I think with risk now of, saying something I shouldn't for my beloved 2 home countries. I was really impressed with Indonesia. I was in Indonesia 6 months ago and also before COVID. And even though we see some challenges in Indonesia, they have obviously a huge population. And also from me looking less at, looking beyond maybe economic models and the numbers, just me landing in Jakarta and seeing the new airport, seeing the infrastructure project that they've been able to run through. I was also in Bali on holiday, seeing how they had shifted that during COVID. I think it was quite impressive. So obviously everyone is saying Indonesia is the future because of population, and then they're wondering if they can catch up. But infrastructure, I was personally very impressed with how they moved. So Indonesia, I think it's absolutely something for the future. What goes for Vietnam, on the other hand, is that stability that we talked about in the beginning. I think they probably have, even though Hansa, you and I can argue the stability in the last maybe 18 months in Vietnam, it's a very stable country, and they will move forward step by step. I think very few, downturns in that way.
We're talking very optimistic, or we are very optimistic about this region. But do you think there are any risks, and not only macroeconomic or microeconomic? It doesn't matter what kind of risk that could threaten this bright future of this region?
Macroeconomic or not, I think we've seen an increased volatility worldwide in the last couple of years. This region, and if I looked at the 2 countries I know, Vietnam and Philippines, that for generations, each generation have only seen they're getting better and better. Their life is getting better and better. They're not used to downturns. They're not used to prolonged macroeconomic downturns. So I think mentally, it could be a little bit tough for this generation to understand that this is not natural cycles. And also the volatility that we see, it's something that these markets are not necessarily used to. They're used to that constant growth, which I think it's a new thing for everyone to handle. But especially for this region, I think it's something quite unique. Obviously, fast-growing regions also can create big wealth gaps, which can create instability as well. And you will see that obviously some of the companies and some of the people are very, very successful, while some don't succeed at all. And I think that could also lead to instability in general. last but not least, I think we need to talk about climate change. It's something that we talk about in Southeast Asia, and I mean, obviously Vietnam having the big coastal area. I think it's something that we haven't dig deep enough to understand for the future and how quickly things are going to shift for this region. So that's a little bit different, maybe also from I think psychological point of view for this region, that they need to learn to go through maybe years or months of less growth, and how will they handle that and still keep that, I would say, positive mood that would generally signify this region.
Now you beautifully sent the ball back to me. So there are, let's say, older economies in Asia that already had to learn how to live with a small growth, or they are trying now to adjust to different era. And one of them, the biggest of them, is China. China was used for the last 30, 40 years of so-called opening up to have a huge growth. Every year was better and better. They didn't need to think about bad debt or bad investments, because they basically just run over them, and with a cheap credit and growing population, everything was rosy. Now things are getting different. We hear every day about middle income trap. We hear about that China hit its limits, that they need to change its own, let's say, economic structure. No more export only, but to be consumption driven economy. So you living south of China in economies that are not dependent but closely connected to China, also from, for example, digitalization perspective. So how you see the China role for Southeast Asia or Asia at large?
Hansa, you probably know China better than me, to be honest, but I think my view potentially is that the narrative, if you read newspapers here in Europe, they have a very, I would say, pessimistic view on China. And for the demographic reason, I think debt to GDP, I think the trade war, real estate, and whatever, yes. I mean, China is a different animal. And I think middle income trap, I could absolutely talk about middle income trap for Vietnam. I think for China, I mean, they're moving quite fast in terms of AI. These guys know how to handle data. They're very organized. I must say that, I mean, I would not underestimate China at all. I absolutely think they will get through this. They have such a different view to look at things. They're so much more long-term than anything else that I know. So I wouldn't count them out at all. Obviously, they're now very domestically focused, what we see. Let's see. Again, you might say that their influence from an outside point of view looks to be less at the moment outside of China. But I mean, of course, you see the direct investments. But if you look at who influences both big companies and I would say even regulations and so on in Southeast Asia, it's still China that has a big influence, even though it maybe for a couple of years it's been a little bit more balanced. But that's my view without being an expert. I wouldn't underestimate them at all.
Yeah, by the way, China was at the front of process of digitalization in Asia. She has a very strong players in this era. And because our audience, we have already told about this before recording, our audience is especially from Europe, and Europeans generally do not know what is the process of digitalization in Southeast Asia. So could you explain for us what are the specifics or characteristics and distinctions of the digitalization process in the Southeast Asia or in the countries you were running business?
So very internet savvy people and very high internet usage. I mean, Philippines, I think it's the highest internet usage in the world. And I think Vietnam is somewhere in the top 10 as well. So internet usage is super high. It's predominantly mobile, of course. Yeah. And remember, this is something very new to this. This is the way they kind of get out in the world. So we call it digital natives, and they are true digital natives because they don't have any alternatives. This has opened the market, I think, especially in this region, which has leapfrogged, I would say, some of the European development, the world of super apps. I don't think we have a super app in Europe. And super apps it's an app you use every day and several times every day. So Grab is one of them. Some of the messenger apps you would see are that, and some of the wallets. And the whole family uses these apps. It could be for rides, it could be for shopping, it could be to, connect with your friends. It's basically there all the time. Yeah. And they're normally also very user-friendly, extremely user-friendly. Yeah, because it needs to be simple. And the attention span, I think, is like 7 to 12 seconds of this generation. So it needs to be, I think it really puts customer experience in the front, or they will change and do something different. And I don't think we have that to the same extent in Europe, because here we've more gone from online to offline, or from offline to online, obviously. There, people have jumped directly online. I think some of the challenges compared to China. China it's again very special. I mean, they have the infrastructure behind, they have KYC behind, they have interoperability. Some of these other countries we've been discussing are still, you will see many of them developing side by side before picking like a model moving forward. So I think that's, we will see, I think, a lot of consolidation in Southeast Asia in terms of digitization.
Like in China, the household names for super apps is companies like, Alibaba, Tencent, Jingdong, and others. So they are standalone, big, mammoth-sized super apps in Southeast Asia. And if there is one distinctive one, similarly like Alibaba in China under Jack Ma, so in Southeast Asia is a Grab. Grab, which started as a ride-sharing app, similarly like we have Uber in Europe and United States. But unlike Uber, Grab was able to open, I think now they have 50 verticals. Even some online dating platform, not even talking about groceries, booking, air tickets, and so on. So Grab, very successful, well-known company. But now, in the last 3-4 years, the situation is not always going up. So now, even though being digitalization leader, now it's been forced to do very painful steps to improve its business. It managed well. It's back in profit. But a lot of other companies, Gojek, Compare Group Asia, and others, they had to get similar, let's say, painful restructurization. So how you see these kind of super apps in Southeast Asia, and namely Grab?
Yeah, I'm very impressed with Grab, and I'm very impressed with the team behind Grab as well. And I think, these guys are true entrepreneurs in the sense that compared to some other mobile apps where people are just striving for a valuation and many users, these guys really want to build something as well. Of course, they want the valuation, but I'm very impressed with how they've done it. And like you said, a couple of years, it was all about valuation and number of users. Now we're moving more towards profitability. And that means that it's different to build an app and get it out, and it's different to monetize it. And many of these players, Grab, including Grab, is thinking of monetization in terms of normally financial services. And I think many of them, they're very bullish in terms of financial services. If you look for 4 years back, 3-4 years back. I would say it's different to build an app to actually manage financial services. It's quite different, both in terms of regulation, in terms of customer, KYC, in terms of costs, in terms of dynamics. And I think some of them have realized that it was a lot more difficult to build this by themselves than they thought. And I think the ones that are being successful are the ones that are actually making partnerships. And Grab has done a number of partnerships, especially in terms of financial services. They're no longer thinking that they will do all by themselves. And they're also, I think, reducing the scope because, again, monetization is about scope. Super apps is about doing everything one way, but maybe not everything yourself. And I think this is what we will see with many of the other apps as well. I think I would differentiate between the apps just going for valuation. That's one thing, I think, putting that aside. And also the apps trying to do everything by themselves compared to doing partnerships. So I would again, partnerships, I think it's the model for the future to reach profitability.
Honza has already talked about Alibaba as a similar company as Grab or Meituan in China. Maybe it's more common. And Alibaba tried to knock the door on this market in the South Asia, but nobody opened. Yeah, it really failed. Alibaba failed there and decided to buy Lazada. It was a better solution for it. As well as Tencent decided to buy SEAI Ltd, which is another big player on this market. So why do you think that the Chinese companies were not successful on this market? What is different?
I mean, they're still there, though, like you say. So they just found a different model. So I think that's obviously they realize that's probably simpler. Each market is quite specific. So I think, just rolling out the Chinese model. And again, China has a totally different infrastructure in terms of KYC, deliveries, and everything else. So just rolling out the same model would be a lot more costly and a lot more risky in the rest of the region. I think that's partly what they experienced and realized it's potentially better from that point of view to make partnership. Also, regulatory-wise, I mean, there is a certain, I would say, cautiousness against Chinese companies, clearly. So I think, therefore, this partnership is the way to move forward. And I think they're doing that quite successfully. I would like to say that during the COVID period, and now just after, they've been very domestically focused. Again, what we see from the outside, I would say still from the inside, they're actually very, very active. Very, very active. And I would say, if I looked at Vietnam and some of the bigger players, you will see a lot of Chinese expats actually still being there, even if things are officially owned locally.
We already mentioned few Southeast Asians, unicorns, super apps, Gojek, Grab. Personally, in Vietnam, I like Momo very much. But could you tell our audience if you see as experts some other companies like the ones I mentioned to look into, like the either emerging or the ones that are already big but not so known in Europe?
This is a very good question. I thought about it, and I also ended up very similar to in my thinking to what you're saying. I mean, I see the wallets. And you already mentioned Momo wallets. In Philippines, they also have several Gcash as a wallet, partly owned by Ali, by the way, and a number of messenger apps. But do I see anything really, really new? I don't. Yeah. So I think my question would be a little bit more: what's going to happen with these wallets and messenger apps? Are we going to see some consolidation on those? Because obviously, what's going on in China, where it's very consolidated in that sense and interoperable. I haven't seen that. So I think maybe you guys can come up with some app I missed, but I haven't seen a big one. I would see more consolidation, like we talked about earlier. If I would see one trend, which is absolutely not a new app, it's the shopping on TikTok, which is totally exploded. And I think this is quite interesting. I mean, TikTok here, we talk about, of course, dancing, and we think about the young population in general. I think they're number 3 to 5 in both Indonesia and Vietnam in terms of value of online shopping, which it's quite big. Yeah, so I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. And a totally new app? No. Do you see a totally new one?
I'm not sure.
No. So look, guys. So the last 3-4 years were quite exceptional. So whoever got an infrastructure pre-COVID was able to boom, because, everybody, Anika was in Vietnam, I was in Hong Kong, we were locked home. So we used what we already know. It was not possible to build something new during COVID times. So bigger are bigger. My good friend, he is a CFO of Food Panda, running it out from Singapore. So Food Panda skyrocketed, for example, in Hong Kong. But COVID times, so nothing new. And then we have high interest rates, which is putting, especially digital entrepreneurs going down, because, it's very expensive to buy a market share now these days. So if you already have a Grab, Gojek, Food Panda and others, delivery, or other companies like Delivery Hero on the market. So if you don't have a lot of money, it's complicated to build the market share. So maybe in future, maybe something is being cooked. But I think from this perspective, last 4 years were quite exceptional.
No, I agree. I think some might try to copy, let's say, Grab and be very successful in one market. But a totally new idea, haven't seen.
Yeah, we're talking about retail, e-commerce, financial services, but especially from the company perspective. But what about the customer? You've already mentioned a little bit who is, what are interested and how are consumers in the Southeast Asia. But when we simplify it, US consumers are used to live on credit. Germany consumers ready to save whatever it takes. So in each continent, the consumer is a little bit different. Can we say anything typical about Southeast Asia consumers in the current situation?
So we're talking credit and their view on credit. I think worldwide, you will see, normally in all cultures, as some skepticism towards credit and managing credit well. I think that's worldwide. You will absolutely see it in Vietnam. There's a big difference also between North and South. The same, in Vietnam. But I think something you need to bear in mind in those economies is that real regulated responsible credit is accessible only for the very few normally. So the banks normally only get credit to, the only very top percentage of the population. And the access to credit that the lower, the middle classes had has been really not good credit, to be honest. I mean, it's been short loans to say, that's what's been existing. So obviously there is some bad sentiments around that from the middle class. You can say, though, as people get access to regulated credit, which is responsible, just like we are used to here, I think you get a much more balanced view on how people see credit. And they absolutely see the use and how it can be used both for safely shopping online and also for spreading consumption throughout the year in a different way. So I absolutely see there's going to be some cautiousness around it. But I also see that, it's getting more positive as it's getting more regulated, because credit needs to be regulated to be responsible, to be honest. I also see a difference that some part of credit, and we talked a lot about digital and online shopping, as you use credit, because that's what we all use, credit to buy things online, we think more about that as payments than as credit. So I think you will really see also a new trend there where people use the world credit more in terms of payment. So I think there are people will be cautious, but I think I also see positive trends in general.
If I add two comments, so I think if I see in Southeast Asia boom of credit that is respectable, reputable, I see two buckets. One bucket we already mentioned. This is super apps. So super app started with a wallet, then basically you combine wallet with revolving product to go to the serve for audience like credit card. So if you are Grab or Gojek, your reputation is very dear to you. So even though you are a little bit wild from regulatory perspective, because many of these players, they run it as an e-commerce solution, not as a credit solution. And credit is connected to risk, and risk is connected to the regulated services. But it's dear to them, their reputation, so they are trying our best. And the second bucket is non-banking companies like home credit. So basically, and this is how we see the trends everywhere in Asia, that the products are being standardized by central banks or by financial regulators. And in the future, I do believe that there will be only two ways how to be part of financial markets in retail: either banks or non-banks, and even fintechs and e-commerce solutions and so on. And we see it in Vietnam. They will need to go under umbrella of central banks because, and Anika said it in the beginning of this interview, social harmony. So like for Grab and Gojek, their reputation is very close to their heart. For the government, social harmony is close to their heart. And they cannot afford to have some Ponzi schemes or pyramid games on the market. So I do believe that shadow banking in retail, well known, for example, in Thailand, it's going down. Philippines the same. And in the future, the regulators will really clean the market. And yes, still there will be some bad credit in some pawn shops. But I think that even the big players like Grab, they will have to ask for financial service license.
No, agree. I couldn't agree more.
And again, it has already started in China. I mean, the shadow banking regulation. Okay, so let's finish our interview in Vietnam, because you've lived in Vietnam last time. Is it right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yeah, that's correct.
This is great, especially for the Czech audience, because we have a very strong Vietnamese community here in the Czech Republic.
So I've heard you serve excellent pho. I had my team there in Old Town eating Vietnamese food.
Okay. And Vietnam is undergoing large changes. You have already told about stability, but it's developing very quickly as well. So how do you see the future in Vietnam? And do you think that the things that are happening there are similar to China in the first decade of this century?
I think it's always very tempting for everyone to compare Vietnam to China, and of course there are similarities, absolutely so. I would say though that the Vietnamese government is a little bit more pragmatic. And I think we can also see over the last couple of months or even year how they actually try to balance East and West. And I think of course, it all depends on how good they are with this balancing act. So I'm not so sure if they will follow exactly the Chinese way of doing things. I think you could see it during COVID. I mean, they acted totally different compared to the Chinese government. I mean, Vietnam is a manufacturing country, and obviously it's been quite good that people move away from China and start to manufacture some things in Vietnam instead. But they don't own the whole value chain. And of course, it's very important, and Hans already mentioned the middle income trap. So I think they moved a little bit up the value chain. Samsung and Apple are manufacturing, but not all components are still in Vietnam. So I think this is obviously a way to go. They're not, I mean, in terms of both education system and infrastructure yet, could they take over some of the things from Taiwan? I think that's a stretch at the moment, but it's obviously something that the government is working very hard on. And I think it all depends on how well they invest, especially in education, which is a big focus from the government. So I think one more thing that's different in Vietnam compared to China is obviously the free trade agreements. They've been quite a lot more keen, I would say, to sign these than what we've seen from their neighbor, so to speak. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think I'm quite hopeful that they will move out of that middle income trap over the years. I think they have a great future. I think government might sometimes be a little bit slower, but there is a direction and a stability, and I think all that plays out for Vietnam in the long term.
Okay, great. I suppose it was excellent answer.
So thank you very much for your time, Anika. All the best in freezing Stockholm. In Czech Republic, we already see the climate change happening because it's February, and throughout the winter there was maybe 5-7 days of snow, and today we have 12 degrees in the middle of February, which is extremely unusual. And some people say that it's the warmest winter in 100 years. So let's see. All the best, and thank you for your time.
Thank you both, and thanks for talking and thanks for having me. And again, Happy New Year, and let's hope for some real fire into the economy this year.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.